Colorado Territory, May 1873. The whistle of the departing train shrieked through the dusty morning air as Harper Pritchard stood alone on the wooden platform, clutching her swollen belly with one hand and a scuffed carpetbag with the other. The door had slammed shut before she could step aboard. She had called out, reached for the conductor's arm. But he had looked through her like she was not even there, and the train had rolled on without her. And without him. She blinked hard against the wind stirred up by the wheels, but the tears came anyway. The man she had trusted, the father of her unborn child, was gone again, this time for good. He had said he needed a moment to speak with the station clerk. She had waited by the bench, rubbing her aching back, while couples boarded, while freight was loaded. Then the train had started to move, and she had realized he was not coming back. Harper's knees buckled slightly, but she steadied herself. The platform emptied quickly, leaving only a few dusty crates, the scent of coal smoke, and the sound of her own shaking breath. No one looked at her. No one asked if she needed help. She lowered herself onto the bench, carpetbag at her feet, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She was 7 months along, and every part of her ached. She had not eaten since dawn, and her last coin had gone to the ticket. She did not even know where she was anymore. Some small town on the edge of the plains. The sign had said something about Fort Garland, but she had not paid attention. She had only been trying to keep up with him. She should have known better. She sat still for a long time, letting the silence wrap around her. Her feet throbbed in her worn boots. The sun climbed higher, hot against her bonnet. The baby kicked once, then again, and she exhaled shakily. That was when she heard boots on the platform. Not hurrying, just walking. She looked up. A tall man in a dust-covered hat and trailcoat was climbing the platform steps, leading a chestnut mare. He had the lean, rangy look of a man who had spent years in the saddle. His dark blonde hair curled beneath the brim of his hat. His eyes were the color of creek water, clear, steady, and quietly curious as they landed on her. He stopped a few feet away. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. Harper hesitated, then shook her head. The man looked down the empty tracks, then back at her. "Train already gone?" She nodded. He looked at her belly, then at her face. "You get left behind?" Her throat tightened, but she managed a quiet, "Yes." He took off his hat and stepped closer, not too close. "Name's Yates Sutton. I was just passing through, picking up supplies. You all right?" Harper swallowed hard. "Not really." Yates glanced at the carpetbag. It was fraying at the edges, one strap nearly torn. "Where were you headed?" "Durango." The word tasted bitter. "But I do not think I am going anywhere now." He crouched down beside the bench, resting his hat on his knee. "You got family there?" Harper hesitated. "No." "Then why Durango?" She looked away. He waited. "My fiancé said he had work lined up. We were going to start over there." Her voice cracked. "He is not my fiancé anymore." Yates was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Sounds like he is not much of anything." Harper gave a tired laugh, dry and humorless. "That is about right." Yates stood again, brushing off his hands. "Well, you cannot stay here. This town does not even have a proper boarding house." "I have no money," she said softly. He looked down at her, then at her belly again. "You cannot sleep on a bench. Not in your condition. I will figure something out." He stood still for a moment, jaw tight. Then he said, "My ranch is 3 miles from here. You can stay in the guest room, just until you figure things out." Harper stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you are alone," he said simply. "And you should not be." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. After a long, quiet pause, she whispered, What if I slow you down? Yates gave a small shake of his head. You are not a burden. You are just someone who got left behind. She blinked fast, trying to keep the tears in. He held out his hand. Come on. Let us get you out of the sun. She looked at his hand for a moment, then reached up and took it. Yates helped her to her feet gently, the way a man would help a woman he respected. As he helped her into the saddle, steadying her with a hand on her back, she asked, Why are you doing this? He looked up at her, his eyes steady. Because you are perfect, he said. She stared at him, stunned. That man left you behind, he added. That is on him. But you are strong. You are carrying life. And you are still standing. That makes you perfect in my book. He mounted behind her and took the reins. Harper could not speak. She leaned back just slightly, against the warmth of his chest, and let herself breathe again. They rode out of the station yard, the town fading behind them. She had been left behind. But for the first time in a long time, she did not feel alone. The sun was dipping low by the time Yates eased the mare into the cottonwood-lined lane that led to his ranch. The air cooled with evening, and the scent of sage grew sharper as shadows stretched across the ground. Harper shifted slightly in the saddle, her back stiff from the ride, but her silence unbroken. The house came into view, a modest two-story place with whitewashed siding and a sloping porch. A chicken coop sat quiet off the barn, and smoke drifted from the chimney. No one waited outside, but the place bore the look of something tended, not abandoned. Yates dismounted first and reached up to help her down. His hand was calloused and warm. She took it wordlessly, bracing herself as her boots touched earth again. Her knees didn't quite hold at first, but he caught her elbow without comment. He led the mare toward the small corral and tied her off, then turned. Let's get you inside. The porch steps creaked under their weight. He opened the door and stepped aside to let her pass. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and something faintly sweet, maybe dried apples. A braided rug covered the plank floor, and a rocking chair sat near the hearth. A rifle leaned against the far wall, polished but clearly used. Everything was simple, but it was clean and orderly. I'll make a fire in the stove, Yates said, already moving toward the kitchen. You sit. She lowered herself onto the edge of the rocker, her hands folded over her belly. It was strange not to feel watched. With him there was no prying, no pity, just quiet steadiness. He lit a flame under the cook stove, then opened a tin from the shelf. I've got beans and cornbread from this morning. They'll warm quick. You live here alone? She asked. He nodded, pouring water into a kettle. Been that way about 4 years now. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the last light brushed the tops of the cottonwoods. Do you like it? Took time, he said. But yeah, I do now. She listened to the sound of the fire catching, the soft clatter of tinware. Her shoulders sank a little, the weight of the day finally easing. I can work, she said after a moment. If you need help with anything. He turned from the stove. You don't need to earn your place here. You've had enough taken from you. A roof and a warm supper that's not charity. It's just right. Harper looked down at her hands. I'm not used to that. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, Most folks ain't. But that don't mean you can't be. The kettle began to hiss. He poured her a mug of hot water and set it on the table beside the rocker. It's just water, he said. But I'll get tea leaves in town next week. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Water's fine. He served the beans and cornbread on mismatched crockery, then pulled a stool near the hearth and sat with his plate balanced on one knee. They ate in silence for a while, the firelight flickering across the floorboards. After a few bites, Harper looked over. Did you always ranch? No. I rode with a cattle outfit out of Abilene for a while. Before that, freight lines. Before that, army. Her brow lifted slightly. You don't seem like a soldier. I wasn't a good one, he said plainly. Didn't take to orders, I guess. She smiled faintly, then looked away. I used to teach letters. Back in Missouri. He nodded. You got the voice for it. She looked at him, curious. What kind of voice is that? Soft, he said. But sure. She didn't know how to answer that, so she didn't. The fire crackled between them. After the plates were scraped clean, he stood and took them to the basin. She heard the pump outside start up, the rhythmic gasp of water being drawn. Then he returned with a bucket and washed the dishes without fanfare. When he was done, he dried his hands on a rag and nodded toward the stairs. Guest rooms at the top, second door. Sheets are clean. I'll sleep down here. She hesitated. It's your house. And you're carrying more than yourself, he said gently. You go rest. She rose slowly, her legs still sore from the ride. At the foot of the stairs, she turned back. Yates. He paused by the hearth. Thank you, she said. His eyes met hers, steady as ever. You don't owe me thanks. Just get some sleep. She climbed the stairs, one hand on the rail. The room was plain but welcoming, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt. A small window cracked to the evening breeze. She sat on the mattress and unlatched her boots, then lay back, one hand resting over the curve of her stomach. Downstairs, the rocker creaked once, then fell still. And for the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. Morning found Harper standing barefoot in the small patch of sunlight that spilled through the window pane, one hand on her side as the baby shifted low. The light painted gold across the quilt, and below, she heard the soft clatter of hooves and the creak of a gate. She dressed slowly, easing herself into a faded calico dress from her bag, then made her way down the stairs, steadying herself on the banister. The kitchen held warmth from the stove, and the smell of sourdough and simmering onions hung in the air. Yates had already been out and back, his boots dusted and his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He stood at the counter, slicing through a slab of cured pork with deliberate care. Coffee's there, he said, not turning. I'm fine with water, she replied, settling into the chair nearest the window. He glanced over his shoulder. Suit yourself. There's eggs too, if you've the appetite. She was surprised to find she did. As he plated the food, she asked, Do you have any hands working with you? Not year-round. Couple boys from town help come branding season, he said. But the rest I manage myself. That's a lot of land for one man. He set her plate down gently. It's enough. They ate without rush. Outside, a breeze tugged the grass flat, and a hawk circled high above the cottonwoods. Yates didn't fill silences just because they were there, and Harper found herself grateful for that. When they'd finished, she stood and gathered the dishes without asking. He didn't stop her, but watched as she moved carefully to the basin. You ever do any garden work? He asked after a few minutes. She nodded. My father kept tomatoes and corn in a narrow stretch behind the schoolhouse. I helped when I wasn't teaching. There's a patch out back. Been meaning to clear it for planting, but the fence needs mending first. If you feel up to it, I could show you. She dried her hands. I'd like that. They stepped out into the yard, where the morning light had warmed the earth. A split rail fence sagged along the far edge, and the soil beyond it was littered with weeds and flattened stalks from last year's crop. Yates handed her a pair of worn gloves, then began testing the rails for rot. Harper bent carefully and began tugging out the weeds, her movements slow but steady. The sun rose higher as they worked, and the quiet between them settled into something companionable. After a while, she asked, Do you ever go into town? Once a week. Fridays. Doesn't seem like much. He shrugged. I've got everything I need here. She looked over at him, curious. Don't you get lonely? He pressed down on a fence post, testing its give. Used to. Less now. She didn't answer, just kept pulling weeds. By midday, they'd cleared half the plot, and Harper had to ease herself down onto the overturned crate he'd brought out earlier. Her back ached deep in the joints and her hands trembled faintly, but her face was flushed with something close to satisfaction. Yates handed her a tin cup of water and sat beside her on the edge of the trough. His shirt clung damp to his back, and he took a long drink before speaking again. You ever think about what comes after? She looked sideways at him. After what? After the baby. After Durango. After him. Harper turned the cup in her hands. I did. When I still thought I'd have someone to raise her with. You think it's a girl? I know it is. He didn't argue, just nodded. I thought about teaching again, she said. Someplace quiet. Honest work. You'd be good at it still, he said. You've got a way of seeing things clear. She looked down, then back at him. What about you? You ever think about after? He was quiet for a few seconds. I did once. Then stopped. Why? Didn't think I'd find someone to build it with. She didn't look away. And now? He met her gaze, eyes steady. I'm still figuring that out. The wind shifted, cooler now, and she tucked a stray strand of hair beneath her bonnet. Her body felt heavy, but not in the way it had on the platform. This was the weight of rest earned, not despair. He stood and offered her his hand. Come on. Time to rest those feet. She took it without hesitation. They walked back toward the house, close but not touching. The cottonwoods rustled above them, and the smell of earth clung to their clothes. Inside, she settled onto the rocker while he fetched a blanket from the back room. He draped it over her knees without a word, then moved to the hearth to check the fire. She watched him, something quiet unfolding behind her ribs. You're not what I expected, she said. He didn't turn. Neither are you. The light through the window shifted again, and she closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his movements and the soft breath of the wind through the eaves. For the first time, she let herself believe there might be a future that didn't hurt. Late May rains came soft and steady, soaking the earth in a way that made everything smell clean and close. Harper stood beneath the porch overhang, her hands pressed to the small of her back as she watched the water ripple through the furrows of the garden patch they'd cleared together. Her skirts clung damp to her ankles, but she stayed where she was, breathing in the scent of wet sage and warm wood. Behind her, Yates stepped out carrying a folded oilcloth. He draped it over the stacked firewood before glancing at her. You'll catch your death standing there, he said, his voice low against the hush of the rain. I'm not made of paper, she said, not quite smiling, but something close to it tugged at the edge of her mouth. The air feels good. He leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. I suppose it does. They stood a while like that, the space between them easy. From the barn came the muted sound of the mare shifting, and further off, the wind combed through the cottonwoods. You strike me as someone who used to speak more than she does now, Yates said finally, not looking at her. I suppose I did, Harper replied. Back when I thought words could save things. He nodded slowly. You lost someone before him? She looked down at the porch planks, then out at the garden again. My sister, 3 years ago, got a fever that winter and never came out of it. You were close. She raised me after our parents died, taught me how to keep books, boil down bones for broth, mend things without showing the thread. Yates didn't offer sympathy, just listened. She used to say, Harper went on, that some folks are born to stay put, and others are meant to carry stories forward. I always thought I was the second kind. But lately, I don't know. You're still carrying something, he said. Just because your path changed doesn't mean you've stopped moving. A silence settled again, but it was weightless. I found your sewing basket, he added. In the bottom of your carpet bag. The handle's cracked. She glanced at him, surprised. I forgot it was even in there. I can fix it if you want. I'd like that. Thunder rolled low in the distance, not close enough to worry, but enough to send a chill up her spine. Yates nodded toward the door. Come on. I've got something that might warm you quicker than dry blankets. Inside, the fire had been stoked back to life, and the iron kettle hissed over the flame. He poured 2 mugs of milk warmed with honey and set them on the table. Harper sat slowly, easing her weight forward as she took the cup in both hands. You ever think about leaving the territory? Yates asked, easing into the chair across from her. I did, when I still thought the world owed me something. And now I think it's not about where I go. It's about who's willing to stay. He held her gaze for a moment. You've got grit. Folks might miss that because you're quiet, but it's there. Harper looked down at her belly. I'm afraid I won't be enough for her, that I'll bring her into a world that won't be kind. You're already enough, he said. You left behind what you thought you needed. You're still standing. That's more than most. She swallowed, her fingers tightening around the cup. You ever have a family? She asked, voice lower now. I had a younger brother, Yates said. He didn't make it back from the war. She waited, but he didn't go on. I'm sorry, she said. That kind of loss changes what you expect from the world, he replied. Makes you quiet inside, even when you're doing fine on the outside. He pushed his empty mug back slightly. I guess I got used to the idea that it'd just be me. Fence work and early mornings. Long rides and short nights. And now, he studied her, his hands folded loose on the table. Now I find myself hoping your child likes wildflowers, because we've got more of them than since come June. Harper blinked, then laughed, soft and surprised. She'll like them, she said. The clock above the mantel ticked on, calm and even. Outside, the rain slowed to a hush. Yates stood and reached for her empty cup. You should rest. She rose with him, slower this time. Her breath had turned shallow, and one hand pressed low beneath her ribs. You all right? He asked, voice tightening. She nodded. Just a twinge. She's getting stronger. I feel her more each day. If it gets worse, I'll tell you, she promised. He hesitated, then said, I'll be in the barn, checking the tack. She touched his arm lightly as he turned. Yates. He looked at her, eyes steady. I don't need saving, she said. I know, but I don't mind being kept company. His face softened, just a little. Then I'll keep showing up. He stepped out into the eaves, pulling his hat low against the last of the drizzle. Harper lingered at the window, watching him cross the yard. She didn't know what their days would look like a month from now or a year, but for the first time in a long while she no longer feared them. June came in quiet, warm and gold. The cottonwoods had filled out thick and green, rustling whenever the wind slipped through the valley. Harper sat on the porch with her feet soaking in a basin of cool well water, a small pile of mended cloth beside her. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Yates stepped out carrying a short bundle wrapped in canvas, long strips of willow wood bound with cord. I cut these upriver, he said, setting them down beside her. Thought you might want to try your hand at a cradle frame. Harper looked up, eyes catching his. You think I ought to be building furniture now? I think you like working with your hands, he said. And I think you'll want her close by, rather than in some store-bought crib. She reached down and touched the smooth curve of one of the slats. These'll do fine. He nodded once, then crouched to check the stitching on the hem of a small flannel wrap she'd just finished. You planning to keep sewing after she's born? As long as she lets me sleep some nights, she said. I'd like to make her things that last. Yates eased back onto the porch rail, arms resting on his knees. I was thinking, there's a schoolhouse in Conejos. Not far. They've been without a teacher since the spring thaw. Harper tilted her head. You want me to take over the school? I want you to know there's a place for you. If you want it, I'd ride you down there myself. And if I don't want to leave? She asked. He looked at her then, brows drawn. Then you stay. And we make something here. She set her sewing aside and leaned back in the chair, watching him. You're sure? I'm not offering it because I feel sorry for you. I know that. I want you here, Harper. Not just for a season. Not just until she's born. Her fingers curled gently around the edge of the basin. I've never been anyone's choice before. You're mine, he said. Every day I wake up, I want to find you still here. She stood slowly, the basin water sloshing as she stepped out and dried her feet on the hem of her dress. When she reached him, she didn't speak. She just took his hand and pressed it low against the side of her belly, where the baby stirred. Yates looked down, his hand still. She kicks hard, he murmured. She knows you're nearby. He looked up. I want to stay, she said. They didn't kiss then, not quite. He pressed his forehead to hers, and she closed her eyes, letting the quiet speak for them both. That night, she moved her few things into his room. They said nothing about it, but her shawl hung alongside his coat on the peg by the door, and her hairbrush lay beside his straight razor on the washstand. He slept beside her on top of the quilt, one hand resting lightly over the curve of her hip, rising only when she stirred from a cramp or a dream she couldn't shake. The rains didn't return. The days stretched warm and long, and the baby arrived just after midsummer, in the cool hush of early morning. Yates sat beside the bed, his fingers wrapped around hers, both of them damp with effort and awe. The midwife handed him a bundle, red-faced and wailing, and he cradled the child like he'd been born knowing how. She's got your mouth, he whispered. She's got your patience, Harper said, though her voice was raw with tears. They named her Ruth, after Harper's sister. The days after passed in a rhythm unlike any they'd known before, soft cries in the night, warm milk on the stove, the creak of the rocker at all hours. Yates built the cradle from the willow he'd cut, carving a small flower into the headboard while Harper rested. Ruth slept best with one of her mother's nightdresses tucked beside her, and Harper hummed old hymn tunes under her breath while she nursed. One morning, Harper found a folded paper under her breakfast plate, an application to the Conejo school. You still want me to teach? She asked. I want you to do what makes you feel whole, Yates said. If that's teaching, I'll hitch the wagon every morning. She looked at Ruth, curled against his shoulder. I think I want to stay right here a while. He kissed her temple, slow and certain. Then that's what we'll do. They planted squash and peas that summer, and Yates added a trellis for beans along the south fence. Harper mended dresses for neighbors, and folks began to stop by with things to trade, eggs for stitching, flour for a lesson in reading. She taught a few children letters under the cottonwoods on Sundays, while Ruth napped in the shade. By autumn, Yates built a second room onto the house, with wide windows and shelves for Harper's books. They didn't speak vows in a church, but the preacher came out one Saturday and read the words aloud while they stood beneath the cottonwoods, Ruth in her mother's arms. They didn't wear rings, but Harper stitched a small red thread into the inside of Yates's shirt collar, and he never wore any other. Years passed. Ruth grew straight and strong, with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet gaze. She learned to ride before she could write her name, and she followed Yates through the barn like a second shadow. Harper taught her to read by lamplight, her voice low and steady as the wind outside. They never left the valley. They didn't need to. Some evenings, Harper would sit in the rocker, Yates beside her on the porch rail, Ruth asleep inside. The land stretched wide and golden before them, the air full of crickets and the smell of cut grass. "Still glad you stayed?" he'd ask. She would lean into him and answer, every time, "I was never meant to be anywhere else." And she wasn't. They grew old together, quietly and without hurry. And they were never alone again.